Fear. Fear never changes. Hello, interwebs, and welcome to my review of Fear Street, Part 1, 1993? I want to say 3. I need to look. I have the information. 1994. I was so close. I forgot the exact year. But yes, this is the first part of the Netflix, Goosebumps Fear Street trilogy that they're doing with a new movie coming out each and every week with them all tied together, telling one giant story. And I watched the first part, and I honestly have to tell you, I really, really enjoyed this movie. I'm going to get fully into some spoilers, but I'm going to keep it fairly spoiler-free throughout most of this, but I'll touch on some small things as related to the next two parts in the trilogy that I'm excited to watch towards the end of this video, so I'll give you a little bit of a warning once we get into some minor spoilers. I won't spoil like the grand scheme of things, but I'll sort of touch upon stuff that goes into the next two movies that are coming up. So let's get into actually the discussion of this movie as it is, as I can say words good. This movie is very much trying to touch upon your nostalgia buttons. Like, it's set during the 1990s. It's like a Goosebumps thing. And I mean, if you grew up in the 1990s, you probably were very into Goosebumps like me. I loved the show. I loved the books. Knowing me, I also really loved the audio dramas. I still love the audio dramas. I think some of them are up on YouTube, and they're like, I still put them on from time to time. They're still legitimately terrifying. And I'm like, how did I listen to these as a kid? Because these are still legitimately horrifying to listen to as an adult. So anyways, this movie is very much trying to hit on all those nostalgia buttons, and they do a really great job just on that level of things. Like, you see Orange Julius's, you see like all the like stereotypical like 90s things, that's set in a mall sort of thing. Very much like it's kind of like Stranger Things meets Goosebumps, but obviously in the 90s, not the 80s, that Stranger Things was at, but it kind of still has that same sort of vibe to it, in that sort of nostalgia baiting kind of way. But this one is very much trying to evoke the slasher thriller, the slasher movie, the suburban, like, kind of Halloween movie. Like when I say Halloween, I mean like the literal Halloween movie with a 90s retro nostalgia vibe to it. And it does it really, really well. But it also updates it for the modern day. We have our main characters, our lesbians characters. Actually, there might be even a little bit of biphobia in there, because one of the characters dates a guy who's a huge jerk, by the way. Pete. Terrible character. I mean, functions well in the story. Terrible character. But I do wonder if there's a little bit of biphobia in this script, unintentionally so, in the sense that one character does date a guy, but the other characters keep calling her a lesbian and everything like that. It's unsure. It's unclear. It could just be a character thing, but it might also be a thing that the script was doing. But so that was a little bit bi erasure might be the better word to say than biphobia. But it was just something that was a little bit like, bit weird that they framed it that way. But otherwise, this was a very, very fun movie. I loved all the characters. Kate and Josh, by the way, are fantastic. Kate is like one of the best friends in this movie, and she's like one of my favorite characters that I've ever seen in a slasher movie. She's always right. She gets things. She's like just down to like roll with stuff. She's very pragmatic, but when she has other options presented to her, she's like, okay, no, we will do this and try and save people's lives. But when it comes down to, she's like, if someone needs to die, someone needs to die, which is like, I mean, that's what happens in a horror movie. Someone's gonna die. Someone's gotta die. And I really appreciated that overall. The cinematography, too, in this film is honestly fantastic. I was honestly shocked by how good the cinematography and editing as well was throughout this movie. The lighting and everything was just a lot of fun. The other thing, too, is I really liked how this sort of evoked a lot of like horror movie thrillers of this era. Like, we have the Scream sort of guy wearing the skull mask. We have the suburban setting. We have like references to other horror things like a witch going on here, Blair Witch Project sort of stuff. Like, very much this is trying to evoke a bunch of different types of movies of this era. And I think it does it pretty well. And touching on some slight spoilery stuff here, it does sort of allude to other stuff that's going to happen in the next two movies. Namely, the killers in this movie are the dead bodies of the killers from the previous eras where this witch had possessed people and tried to get people killed. So all that was really cool to see. Like, oh, there's these evocations of like the like Friday the 13th, like camp counselor stuff going on here. We have stuff of like the old ancient, like the Vivitch movie, like the old ancient like 1600s horror vibe to it as well. So just like I love these evoking of things and tying threads together to movies that are going to come later in the trilogy, while still feeling like this movie feels like a self-contained full film. I was a bit worried that this movie is going to end on feel like a sense of like, oh, I don't really get a full story, it's just going to end on a big cliffhanger. But this movie does have a definitive end point to it that made me feel like, oh, I felt satisfied watching this. But then there's a cliffhanger after that that does sort of be like, oh crap, oh crap. And makes you want to go into the next two movies to sort of set up what's the further mystery and further plot thread going into the film. But it still feels like a self-contained thing here within this movie itself. Some negatives I want to touch upon with the movie is the main character, Dina. I wasn't in love with her character. I'm fine with main characters being flawed, but there's a difference between having a character be flawed and making her somewhat unlikable. And towards the beginning of this movie, they make her character a little bit too unlikable for my taste. Again, she has this relationship with another character, Sam. I don't want to spoil the specifics of how that relationship works out, but she's a bit harsh on Sam and how their breakup happened. And it really kind of frustrated me just to see how harsh and how just like kind of cruel she was to her, and there was no real like answering or acknowledgement to that within the film itself. And I was sort of a little bit like, she just came across as a bit too unlikable and a bit too unreasonable for me. So that as the film went on and she sort of softened and sort of going through her arc, I don't think the film really ever addressed the things that turned me off from her, in the sense of like just being really harsh and being kind of very like not understanding of someone else's situation, and also being kind of very needy as well. And to be fair, there are two more movies that this character is going to appear in, so it's quite possible that her arc is not completed, but it feels like this is the movie where she's going to get the predominant amount of character development considering the setting of the next two movies, where they'll be primarily focused. So I hesitate. I'm willing to give her a little bit more leeway in seeing more stuff, but there was like points in the movie where she's like, "You're my everything. You're my way out," and I'm like, and that's supposed to be like the revolution of her arc, and I'm like, it kind of irks me to see a character who's like, "You're my way out of this situation," when she was so toxic towards the front of the film. It just the character development just didn't fully work for me, and again, I'm willing to see in the next two movies how that goes, and I am excited to see the next two movies if that tells you anything about this one. But it just her character was not the strongest protagonist for me in this film. The other thing, too, is this wasn't particularly super scary. Everything about this movie was enjoyable and a lot of fun. I had good times with it. There's some good twists throughout it. Some gruesome moments, too. Like, if you like gore, there's definitely some gruesome moments in here. It's not the goriest I've ever seen. It's not like The Thing or anything like that, but it's definitely like, whew, that was intense. It comes out of nowhere, considering how glitzy and glossy this film kind of looks at some certain points. So it doesn't feel like it's going to usually go that far, and it does, and I kind of enjoyed that sort of subversion of the sort of blockbustery type of look with this film. But that being said, nothing ever supremely surprised me. Nothing ever like was like a standout, like, oh my gosh, that's so cool moment. There was a lot of good moments, but there was never anything that really stood out as like a truly signature sequence that I was like, I have never seen this before. This has never been done before, or it's something new or surprised me. It was all just like, this is effectively done. This is good. I'm enjoying it, but I was never overly like shocked by anything throughout the film that was like, oh yeah, this really stands out. It's something truly amazing. So at the end of the day, as I wrap up my thoughts here, this movie was very solid. A good bump in nostalgia. It gets those Goosebump vibes, gets those 90 vibes to you. The characters are all good. It was a lot of fun within here. I enjoyed the interplay between the characters. There were some good sequences, good horror. The cinematography is amazing, but the characterization is a little bit flat, especially on the main character. And then the sequences never stood out going beyond and doing anything truly new or fantastical. It's very much trying to just evoke the nostalgia rather than doing anything particularly fascinating or new. It's basically going to be like the greatest hits of some of the stuff that you enjoy. And that being said, I enjoy greatest hits albums. Who doesn't? It's a good time. So overall, a solid first film. I'm excited to watch the next two, especially since they seem to be doing their own sort of nostalgia for different types of horror, with the next one sort of being a like summer camp, like Friday the 13th vibe. So a lot of fun. I deeply enjoyed it. I highly recommend it, especially if you're looking for that greatest hits feeling, nostalgia feeling on a horror film. But it's not one that I'm going to put as like a classic by any means, but definitely enjoyable overall. So that's my thoughts on Fear Street Part 1, 1994. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments below. Are you excited for the next 2 films in the series? I will try to review them as best I can for the next few weeks. Hopefully timing will work out and everything on that front with my availability and stuff, but I'm going to try and aim to review them. And yeah, I'd just like to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.